right? And so Jesus, and this is amazing, so knowing, that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, he knew who he was. He knew, right? And yet, he was willing to take on the role of a servant, took up a towel and girded himself and washed the disciples' feet. So I kind of call this the illustrated sermon, and to show the disciples that they were to act from the same, the self-sacrificing humility which Jesus exemplified. Because you will see starting verse 12. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments and sat down again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am." So Jesus knew who he was. Right? If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Now notice it didn't say you should do what I have done to you. So most likely he wasn't expecting them to continue with this foot washing tradition or something. But he wanted to draw their attention, as to his attitude, that you should do as I have done to you. To always act with that attitude of servanthood, being a servant, to have a servant's heart. And really Jesus had dealt with them before on this issue. I'm going to go to Matthew 20. Matthew 20. Here Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem with his disciples for the last time. And they're arguing about who will sit at his right and left hand when he comes into his kingdom or power. And so all this time, of course, his disciples were expecting Jesus to establish his kingdom right there, right? And of course, it was not going to be so. But we're going to read from Matthew 20:25. And he saw what was happening. They were kind of arguing about, who will have the best seat next to Jesus, the power, the seat of power next to Jesus. But it says 25, but Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life a ransom for many." All right, and so he's again telling them about servanthood. And then I'm going to turn to Luke chapter 22. And here we see Jesus sharing the last Passover meal with his disciples. I mean, it's just close to where, Jesus will be betrayed and crucified. And I'm going to start reading from Luke 22. Let's see. Well, I'll just read from verse 21. It's kind of interesting because here Jesus is sharing with them, "Oh, but behold, the hand of my betrayer is with me on the table. And truly, the Son of Man goes as it has been determined. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed." And so, of course, in verse 23, it says, "Then they began to question among themselves which of them it was who would do this thing." So that's understandable. And so Jesus is talking about a serious matter here, right? I mean, he's about to just go to the cross. And so, what the disciples can't be talking about at the same time here? Verse 24 says, now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. So here Jesus is saying, he's going to be betrayed soon, and all these things. And they're saying, which of them will be considered the greatest? And so he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. He may have been a little cynical, because a lot of those in authority were kind of tyrannical, okay, and not beneficial, or benefactors. But verse 26, it says, but not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger. Now you know that in those days, in that culture, the youngest was considered the least important. Okay? So, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Well, that's the common, the worldly standards. Yet, I say among you as the one who, yet I am among you as the one who serves. And you notice he didn't say, yet I am over you as the one who serves. But Jesus said, yet I am among you as the one who serves. I am there as their servant, to serve them, to teach them, and just help them in every way. So, what is true greatness? You see, Jesus, Pastor was sharing last week that the true blessing, right, is being able to be a channel of God's blessing, to be a blessing. Well, what is true greatness? Well, it is characterized by humility and service. Humility and service. Okay? It's not characterized by how many houses you got, nice cars, powerful positions. That's great if God gives it to you. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? But what truly characterizes greatness in God's kingdom, it is humility and service. So was all his sermons wasted upon the disciples on this issue? In 2 Peter 1:1, it says, and this is Simon Peter writing his epistle. It says, Simon Peter, a bondservant, an apostle of Jesus Christ. He learned, right? And as you read the other epistles, even though they were not there for that foot washing, they learned. A lot of them mention a bondservant of Jesus Christ. They served as the apostle, and so on. They held an important function in the body, but they were serving as a servant. Okay, now I'm going to turn to 1 Peter 5:5. 1 Peter 5:5. You know this passage. It says, likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you, be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility. For God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. You see that phrase, be clothed with humility. Be clothed with. That the Greek that is used there means to be clothed with, means to gird oneself. To gird oneself. And the interesting thing, and I found this just so wonderful, is that at that time, the apron that was worn by the servants was called, now I know I'm gonna butcher this Greek, enkomboma, something like that. And it has the same root word as the one used for to be clothed with. Same root word. It's almost like put on, the apron of a servant, right? And perhaps, Peter, when he wrote this, be clothed with, gird yourself with, humility. Perhaps he was thinking of Jesus when he girded himself with a towel, right? And washed the disciples' feet. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And as I was thinking about this and about having a servant's heart, I began to realize that many that God has raised up to be leaders were prepared by serving others. By serving others. A lot of times God, does not prepare you to lead by using you as a leader, right? He has you serving, so your attitude will be right when you come into authority and power. It's that attitude of servanthood, to serve others. And when you look at, you cannot help but to think of this country right now, those that are running Washington, right? This country. It's the opposite, right? Yeah. There's a power grab going on. There's very little of serving the people. I think that has kind of gone out the window, right? That's the world way. We're seeing graphically the world, functioning when you see that. But not in the kingdom of God, right? The one that's greatest is the one that's serving others. And I was thinking of some of the examples, and I was thinking of Joseph to begin with. And we know that Joseph was the favorite of his father, Jacob. And Jacob even gave him a coat of many colors. And I'm sure he wore it so that all his brothers will see it, I'm sure it was, right? The coat of many colors. And he was even given 2 wonderful dreams from the Lord. And so I'm sure Joseph had it good. He had it good, right? But then what happened? He was sold into slavery by his brothers. And I'm sure it was an extremely humbling experience. I mean, it's like he went from up there to the lowest, right? From being the favored son to a slave, literally a slave. Right? And of course, we know he was eventually taken to Egypt and sold as a slave to Potiphar's house, to his household. But, what I'm amazed at, Joseph, didn't become bitter and complain about his lot in life, but rather he trusted in God and allowed him to humble him. He allowed him, to humble him. And in Genesis 39, it tells us that Joseph, served Potiphar well. Served Potiphar well. And so much so that Potiphar made him overseer of all his household and all that he had. Of course, he had the help of the Lord. He didn't do it himself. But he was willing. He was willing. He didn't get resentful and all this bitterness and all those things. No, he allowed God, to mold him, to humble him. And then, of course, later, the Potiphar's wife lied about him, and then he ended up in prison. But again, he served the keeper of the prison well. And so he was put in charge of all the prisoners and all that they did. But we do know that the day of exaltation came, right? For Joseph, when he was able to interpret the two dreams that Pharaoh had. My goodness, he went from a slave to a number 2 man in Egypt, right? So when his heart was ready, God exalted him and just, put him in that place of leadership. And it's kind of interesting. But in 1 Peter 5:6, it says, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. And of course, the due time came to Joseph for sure, right? It took a long time. It wasn't just a year or two, but the due time came, right? But, I was reading the reference book where it says, humble yourselves. Really, in the Greek, it's in the passive tense. Be ye humbled.